Risotto has to be stirred, but contrary to popular belief, you do not have to stir it constantly, or anywhere near constantly. Nor do you have to add the broth little by little. You can literally add all the broth at once, stir it just once at the very end, and you will still get that beloved mantecato creamy texture. That's according to my experiments, that's according to other people's experiments. How frequently you work your rice makes little, if any, difference in the final texture. I mean, people aren't stupid, and traditions don't come out of nowhere. There are advantages to working your rice more frequently, but I think this whole constant stirring thing is maybe just advice that people took a little too literally and then it stuck. I'm going to show you some recent risotto experiments and everything that I've learned about how cooking variables affect texture. I'm also going to try the unthinkable washing risotto rice. First, let's do a baseline experiment, just plain risotto. I'm using Violone Nano rice. I prefer Carnaroli, but it's hard to get where I live. Usually we can only get arborio. I'll chop up some shallots, and then I'm gonna measure out my stock, just so I can see how much I've used at the end. I'm gonna give each risotto however much stock it seems to want. I just wanna know how much that was. Sometimes I start risotto with olive oil, sometimes butter. Today it's going to be a tablespoon of butter because butter is easier to measure for the sake of consistency in experimentation. A heaped tablespoon of shallots in there, fry those for a minute, and then in with half a cup of dry Violone Nano. That's almost 100 grams on the button. Stir and cook for a couple of minutes until the rice smells nutty. No idea if that traditional step is actually important, but I can only test one variable at a time. Also, keeping with tradition, I'll throw in a quarter cup of white wine, and when that's absorbed, I'll start dropping in stock little by little and stirring constantly, literally constantly. I will not stop. Oh yeah, and I am just using room temperature stock out of a carton. Tradition dictates that you use hot stock. We can systematically test that another day, but in my experience, it doesn't really matter. Maybe it matters in a commercial context when you're working a large quantity of risotto, if you put in a ton of cold stock that could really pull down the temperature of the pan. But when you're just cooking a couple of portions over a powerful modern burner, you put the stock in and it simmers almost instantly. I'm gonna end up adding my stock in nearly a dozen little installments. The thinking here, as it is often explained, is that you want to maximize friction between the grains through the cooking process. You don't want them swimming around in too much stock. You want to keep the texture tight in there so that the grains rub up against each other and shed starch into the liquid. Free starch gelatinizing in liquid is what makes risotto creamy. That much is not in dispute. What we're testing is whether the grains really need to rub up against each other for 20 minutes in order to render said starch free. As the rice starts to look fully cooked, I'll start tasting. For me, the big trick with risotto is to stop cooking when the rice is still a hair crunchy. By the time you actually eat it, it'll be slightly al dente, which is the magical, fleeting texture, in my opinion. Without that, risotto is just a savory rice pudding. With my heat off, I'll melt in a quarter cup of freshly grated pecorino. Normally you do a little butter at this stage, but I started with a lot of butter and this looks good to me. I know lots of people like it looser or richer, you do you. From the time the shallots went in, that took 20 minutes. Constant stirring. Undeniably creamy yet toothsome texture. Magical. And let's see, that was 350 mils of stock. With the wine, that's about a 4-to-1 liquid to rice ratio. With arborio, it's usually more like 3-to-1, but Violone Nano is more absorbent. Anyway, now let's make risotto the way I normally make it, which is way less work. Same tablespoon of butter, same spoonful of shallots, same 100 grams of rice, same 60 mils of wine. Sorry, I steamed you. Now, instead of stirring the stock in little by little, I'm just going to eyeball almost as much stock as I think the rice will need, enough to submerge like twice as much rice. Now I'm just going to leave that over medium heat as we did before and not even touch it for like 10 minutes. I'll come back when I see that this has absorbed most of the liquid. While we wait, I can tell you about the sponsor of this video, HelloFresh. Risotto may be a great weeknight meal, but it does take a little practice, and let's be honest, I don't need a bowl of starch every night. I need some farm-fresh vegetables and some protein. We often order vegetarian boxes from HelloFresh just to get more veggies, but this week we wanted some meat. Let's do those bulgogi meatballs. You can switch up your plan with HelloFresh whenever you want. Get calorie smart boxes or the kid-friendly boxes, skip a week of deliveries, whatever. I like having someone else figure out dinner for me 3 days a week. The instructions are always foolproof. HelloFresh has 40 weekly recipes to choose from, and they help me get out of recipe ruts. That gingery rice is going to be hot with 3 T's. And what I love most about cooking with HelloFresh is what I'm left with at the end. Nothing. No leftover ingredients. Everything comes pre-portioned, reducing food waste. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do with the rest of the Korean barbecue sauce bottle because it doesn't exist. All I'm stuck with is a quick, hearty dinner. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code AdamRagusea65 for 65% off plus free shipping. 65% off with my link and code in the description. Thank you, HelloFresh. So anyway, when I make risotto, I start by pouring in almost as much stock as I think the rice is going to take. When in doubt, be conservative because you can always add more. And I will. That is still crunchy. Gonna need some more stock. For the last few minutes, I'll cook this more the traditional way. Tiny dose of stock, stir, tiny dose of stock. Because I don't know exactly how much stock the rice is gonna need. Every risotto is different, and it's not like I'm into precise measurements anyway. Finish with cheese, and yeah, that is just as creamy as the previous risotto we stirred constantly. One thing that's different is that it took almost 100 mils more stock, 5-to-1 liquid to rice ratio. I've done this experiment many times before, and it always comes out something like that. It's counterintuitive to me, but when you just flood the rice and let it cook undisturbed for a while, you get more evaporation. The stock concentrates, reduces more over the course of the cooking. And as a result, that second risotto tasted saltier than the first one did because there's a lot of salt in this cartoned broth. I usually use the sodium-free or low-sodium kind. This is not an inherently good or bad phenomenon, I don't think. It's just something to be aware of. But the texture is the same. You do not have to stir constantly to get creamy risotto. The starch frees up just fine regardless. Here's an experiment I've never tried before. I'm gonna stir this risotto not at all. I've precisely measured out 450 mils of stock, which is the final sum of what the last risotto took. I'm literally not gonna touch it. And 20 minutes later, the liquid is mostly absorbed, but that does not look like risotto. It just looks like wet rice. I'll stir in my cheese and hey, hold on. That's starting to look like risotto now. Stirring seems to be necessary to free up some starch and thicken the liquid, but it looks like you can literally just stir it once at the very end and get the same effect. I will say this risotto is not as good as the first two. The rice is too soft in its core. I think it just got too much liquid. The big advantage of adding your stock in little doses is you're less likely to stir in too much stock. And stirring probably makes sure that the grains at the bottom don't cook differently from the grains at the top, and stuff at the bottom doesn't stick to the pan and burn. Stirring is good, you just don't have to do it that much. Now let's do something really heretical. I'm washing the rice, Asian style. Swish, swish, swish to rub off the free starch coat, pour off the starchy water, and repeat until the water runs clearer. It'll never be totally clear. For Asian-style rice, this helps you get fluffy, separate grains, a drier texture, which is literally the opposite of what we want for a European-style rice dish like risotto or paella, which is why this is not traditional. An Italian might do one little soak to get off any dirt or debris back in the day when there was dirt and debris on rice. Modern rice cleaned with a husk aspirator is super clean, but back in the day you might have wanted to literally clean it with water, and I'm surprised to smell that I am able to toast that rice even though it was wet when it went in. I'll cook this my normal way where I only stir for the last 2/3 of the process, and I have to say that's looking pretty creamy despite the fact that we washed off the free starch coat. What's different is the grains are noticeably smaller. We dissolved off some of the rice when we washed. We have a creamy risotto, we just have less of it. That is not at all what I expected. This risotto is also done 5 minutes sooner, probably because we pre-hydrated the grains, and again, the texture at the core of the grain is a little too soft for my taste, but I may have simply overcooked this a little. So I think I have to issue a correction. I have previously said that risotto literally won't work if you wash the rice. That is the conventional wisdom, but based on one little experiment at least, that doesn't seem to really be the case. Washing risotto rice is just unnecessary and wasteful. Might be a different story with paella, because paella you don't stir What's far more important to risotto success is that you stop cooking before the grains have softened all the way, and that you eat it before they soften all the way. The rice is only perfectly al dente for a few magical minutes, and that's why homemade risotto is almost always better than restaurant risotto. This timing is just too tricky for restaurant service, unless you're eating at an uncommonly great place. I say get your Michelin star risotto at home.